Welcome, amazing people, to another episode of The Hopeful Majority. But importantly, this is actually part one of a two-part special discussing the Trump-Harris debate that's happening tomorrow. Yes, I know y'all are tuned in. Armageddon has arrived. The craziness of the greatest reality TV show of all time, which is politics, is approaching a climax. And I know we're all tuning in, and The Hopeful Majority's got you covered. The reason why we're dividing this actually into two parts is because today we're going to drop an episode that this content that you're listening to right now is about me explaining a little bit of what to watch for to see and understand how the people that are playing the game that is politics divide us. If we can better understand their tactics, we can see behind the scenes, understand, well, he or she said this line in this way. You can start to make sure that the political implications don't translate to hate for each other's fellow Americans. So we can first, we're going to try to understand and expose the way that we're divided. And part two is going to be a reflection on the debate that we're going to drop after the debate happens. And again, none of this is talking about who wins or who loses, because there's a lot of shows out there that do that. That's not interesting. That's not new to me. What's new and interesting to me and you is understanding how the game of politics is played, how to watch things like this debate, so that we don't leave more divided, which is actually what oftentimes our leaders, our media pundits want, because as we know, outrage drives profit and engagement. I appreciate you listening. If you're new to the show, every Monday we drop content, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. You're noticing my background's a little bit different, and yes, that's because I'm in a different spot today, but I'll be back to regular programming right after the Trump-Harris debate. I hope you enjoy. Let's get into the monologue. What to watch for in tomorrow's debate so that we're better prepared. In fact, I think of it as we're inoculated against the polarizing tactics of our political theater. Because right now we live at a moment, as we've talked about throughout the show, where outrage wins and nuance loses. Now, a lot of this episode is actually going to harken back to my episode right after the Trump-Biden debate in July, where we actually discuss some of the tactics that happened in that debate, so that you can understand how our politicians divide and how we are turned against each other, the tactics they use, the way in which they clip content. And that's actually what we're going to step forward on a little bit more today. Now, before I get into this and highlight the three things that you should be watching out for, you're going to say, look, Manu, politics is a dirty game. I get this all the time, right? They say, politics is a dirty game. Of course, people are going to be divided. Of course, people are going to try to turn us against each other. Yes, I get that. But the last 10 years, something different is happening. Something different is happening. It's not just that politics is a dirty game. Politics being a dirty game is translating to you and I hating our fellow Americans. That's different. Poll after poll shows that the people that we disagree with, we think are fundamentally evil. That's different. That's going from a game to real life. When we hear phrases like civil war, when we hear growing political division, when we see that our problems, our pressing problems, we just had a school shooting last week, the tragic school shooting in Georgia. We see problems continuing to compound, and we can't solve them because we're so incredibly divided. So I want to quit this notion that this is normal. It's not normal. It's not normal to say that your opponent is fundamentally evil. It's not normal to say that your neighbor who believes in, let's say, pro-life as opposed to pro-choice hates humans. That's not normal. And we have to start changing that. And that's not to normalize people's opinions. It's to get to a playing field where democracy can actually work. That's the goal of the show. That's the goal of this episode. Politics is a dirty game? Yes. Are debates going to be explosive? Yes. Is disagreement important? Yes. But the question is, how are we disagreeing? How are we having conflict? So here are three things that you got to watch out for in tomorrow's Trump-Harris debate, because I think that knowing these three things is going to inoculate us and make us less susceptible to being polarized as Americans. Because while the people out there play their games, we got to make sure that we take care of each other. Because if we can't take care of each other, we don't have a democracy. It's that simple. As you know, I say oftentimes in the show, you don't have a democracy if we cannot talk to each other, right? You hear me? Let's get on with it. Three things. The first thing to watch out for is that this debate is all about the short clips. It's about the memes. We talked about the memification of politics. What both candidates are going to be focused on is making sure that they say the hot take in exactly that 30-second way, so that their social media interns, their Gen Z team, yes, my fellow young people, are going to get out there and clip that content and turn it either for them or against them. That's all this is focused on. Their campaign has prepped them, the candidates, Vice President Harris and former President Trump, to speak in a way in which this debate is litigated on TikTok and Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. And once you start to realize that this debate is not meant for an hour and 30-minute format, but it's meant to be commodified into short reels, suddenly you'll start to see this is why they don't actually get into the substantive nitty gritty of policy. This is why when the border stuff comes up, President Trump is probably going to say something like the illegal invasion is happening, and Vice President Kamala Harris is probably going to say something like President Trump hates immigrants. And the unfortunate reality in that debate is that nobody wins or loses when it's just those two claims. The only thing that happens is that the status quo remains. And when the status quo remains, the most vulnerable in our society suffer. Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter. So when you start to realize that the debate is geared towards the memification of politics, when the debate is meant to be litigated in TikTok and Twitter, suddenly we start to realize, that's why they're saying what they're saying. And that way, when you hear their claim, we shouldn't process that claim as truth. We should process that claim as a manufactured product. It's a commodity. When we start to think about their hot takes as a commodity, suddenly we as Americans, those of us that are watching this great reality TV show out there, those of us that are consuming it through our short reels, we're less susceptible to hating each other. Point number two is that the political leaders at this time understand that because we live at a moment of extreme division, the only way to maximize turnout, the best way to get the base out there, is for the base to absolutely hate and be scared and fearful of the other side. If suddenly you knew that if the other side marches in, and all hell is going to break loose, you're going to show up to the polls. Now, I can already hear somebody saying, well, Manu, that's actually true. I could hear somebody on the left saying, President Trump is a genuine threat to democracy. I could hear someone on the right saying, Vice President Kamala Harris is creating a leftist ideology that's going to take over and destroy America. I would argue that there might be shades of that are true on both sides. But the veracity of those claims is purely the product of the outrage that we've been living in the last 7 years. The fact that that's the normal thing to say about each other, I think fundamentally means that while there might be problems on both sides that are real and genuine, we're not actually getting to the core of them. When you live in an environment that is purely focused on turning against as opposed to turning toward and working together, what's going to happen is democracy isn't going to be saved. The border issues aren't going to be solved. The opiate problems afflicting fellow Americans are not going to be solved in the Midwest. What's going to happen is that we live at a stalemate. And so this debate is purely geared not at convincing you that might be like, man, I wish, Kamala Harris might say something that gets me to vote for her. Man, I wish President Trump says something or acts in a way that gets my vote. No, it's going to be purely geared at turning out their base. That's it. We're past the era of persuasion in politics, which is incredibly unfortunate because I think persuasion assumes a certain sense of hope and possibility. And we got to flip that. The reason for this hopeful majority, the reason why we're building this environment, this show, is for us to be able to recognize that most Americans out there actually believe in persuasion. Most Americans out there want to be able to solve our problems. Most of us, frankly, just want to be able to go to our barbecues and our cookouts and not have to worry about whether or not our politicians are on their job, because that's what democracy should be, is that we vote, we stay informed, we understand litigate issues, we figure it out. The debate is going to force us to live in a zero-sum mindset, a zero-sum world. I win, you lose, at each other's expense. Sorry to break it to you, democracy doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. If it worked that way, if democracy is a system where your view 100% of the time is enforced, then I think you're missing the point of democracy. I'm sorry, but the cost of democracy is dialogue. The cost of democracy is deliberation. The cost of democracy is understanding that healthy disagreement should be our currency. Sorry to break it to you, but your agenda is not getting 100% through. That's not how the system was built. That's not how it was set up. Now, that doesn't mean that you're compromising with somebody that's fundamentally against you. But that is a topic for a lot of episodes in the past. In fact, the 2 episodes ago, we actually had an amazing guest who specifically discussed what it means to actually be able to disagree with people that are fundamentally different than us. And if that's a question that you've got, go back to that last episode because I think it's a fascinating conversation and dialogue. Point number three. Point number three is that the media pundits, the spin masters, the influencers that are going to do their post-debate analysis have one goal in mind. And that's not to analyze the truth. It's to drive engagement. The reason and the way in which post-debate analysis happens for it to be so hyper partisan and disruptive, why do you think that is? Is because they know that if the analysis of the debate is, I thought, Vice President Harris made a couple of good points. I thought President Trump made a couple of good points. This is where I think they're failing. That's boring to watch. That's not fun television. It's because we live in the age of outrage, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to create content that's charged so that you stay on. Because what drives money for media? What drives money for Instagram influencers and YouTubers? What drives content and influence for political candidates and drives contributions and donations, which is their other goal? Drives all of that is for you to stay on and keep watching. If you click off this episode in 10 seconds, YouTube's not going to recommend it. But if you watch that crazy debate and you watch the post-debate analysis on CNN for another 30 minutes because you have your favorite anchor dunking on the other side, well, that's the entire game. That's the entire game. So the debate and the analysis is going to be built to be inherently polarizing and divisive. They're going to inherently say things like that side fundamentally believes that they're going to take away your right. They're going to say stuff like that because that is what drives content engagement. Now, again, you might say, but I believe that. Here's my point. Well, let's say you do believe it. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to fix it? My proposition is that I think the way in which we combat change and create progress at this moment is to not divide, but to understand, because we're in a gridlocked system. And if you want to get legislation across the board, you want to get your candidate across the board, we got to build governing coalitions with people that are fundamentally different than us and disagree with us, because that's the lifeblood of democracy. So I want to wrap this up with the following. 2 quotes I want to share from the Trump-Biden debate, which feels like eons ago. Man, that feels crazy long ago. 2 quotes. One quote from President Trump: the worst administration in the history of America. President Biden: everything he said is a lie. The greatest economy we've ever seen. Now, if I asked a 6th grader to write an essay, forget 6th grade, write a paragraph describing X or Y, this thing, and that's what they came up with, right? Those 2 sentences, something like the adjectives, right? The greatest economy we've ever seen. This is my analysis teacher. The worst administration in history. At best, they'd probably get a C. Because that's not how we should be thinking. And you ask, well, why does that persist? Why do they continue talking that way? Why am I going to hear more stuff like that in tomorrow's debate? It's because of everything we just discussed. They want your engagement, they want your eyeballs, and they know you'll buy it. And the goal of this show, the goal of this episode, as we go into the debate tomorrow, is to understand exactly what they're trying to sell you so that you can expose it, understand it, and consume it in your most effective way. I want us to be literate in the way in which we are being divided so that we can navigate this incredibly tense moment in our country's history. Yes, we've got real divides. Yes, we got real issues. Yes, there are fundamental disagreements. The question, again, is not whether or not we disagree, whether or not politics is dirty. It's about how we disagree. It's about how we convey hope through politics, because real issues are on the line. The people out there, the people that are dividing us, they're not going to lose. We will. I hope you find the debate interesting. I'm curious to see what happens, and I'm going to catch you in part 2 of this episode. Stay tuned right after the debate, where we're actually going to discuss whether or not a lot of our predictions came true. This is the only place where you get content like this. This is the only place you get content like this, because everybody else is focused on your eyeballs and engagement and driving attention, whereas we're focused on trying to uncover the realities of our political polarization. If you're joining us and you're new, every Monday, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get content, we bring it to you. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, Apple, leave a review. We're building this hopeful majority together, and I'll see you part 2. Stay tuned, everybody.